The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. The crowds asked John the Baptist, "What should we do?" He said to them in reply, "Whoever has 2 cloaks should share with the person who has none, and whoever has food should do likewise." Even tax collectors came to be baptized, and they said to him, "Teacher, what should we do?" He answered them, "Stop collecting more than what is prescribed." Soldiers also asked him, "And what is it that we should do?" He told them, "Do not practice extortion, do not falsely accuse anyone, and be satisfied with your wages." Now the people were filled with expectation, and all were asking in their hearts whether John might be the Christ. John answered them all, saying, "I am baptizing you with water, but one mightier than I is coming. I am not worthy to loosen the thongs of his sandals. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fan is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his barn. But the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire." Exhorting them in many ways, he preached good news to the poor. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Through my 26 years as a Catholic priest, I've had numerous people come to me in their late teens, their 20s, their 30s. I remember someone coming one time who was in their mid-60s, asking me the question, "What should I do with my life? What should I do?" And I'd like to share with you a story about someone who was 17 years old when he asked that question, a man by the name of Jim Martin, who began his undergraduate studies at the University of Pennsylvania's famous Wharton School of Business, hoping a business degree could get him into any number of lucrative fields. At least he could get a high-paying job. So he took finance and accounting, got his degree, and settled in with a corporate program at General Electric. Pretty good. Of course, being young, he never asked himself the important questions, what do I desire in life? And what does God desire for me? He was working around the clock, making big money, witnessing at times some dishonest and callous behavior in the corporate world, but hey, there's always a big paycheck waiting. Still, his life seemed meaningless. One night he came home to his apartment he shared with 2 other guys, and dead tired, got a drink and turned on TV. He happened to come across a public television documentary on Thomas Merton, the playboy turned Catholic, turned monk, turned mystic, who had an enormous influence on millions of people through his writings. Jim Martin bought his autobiography, The 7-Story Mountain, found that Merton had struggled with the same questions as he and the same addictions to pride, ambition, and selfishness. It made him think and reassess his own life and come back to that haunting question, what should I do? Eventually what he did was quit his big paying job with the big salary and become, of all things, a Jesuit priest and missionary to very poor lands. It's amazing how he left the big check for a big piece of the kingdom of God. Our gospel passage today from St. Luke is in 2 sections. The second section, beginning at verse 15, is common to all 4 gospels. The ministry of John the Baptist. We've heard those words, "I'm not fit to untie the sandal straps of the one who's coming after me." But it's that first section, verses 10 through 14, that is unique to Luke in its content. And what's going on? Well, Luke tells us that John the Baptist is in the desert carrying out a baptism of repentance, not like the baptism we're going to be doing for Journey in just a few moments. This was a ritual washing, which was an outward sign that said to the world, I am going to change. That was the whole purpose, to make that statement. So people were going down there. And after they were baptized by John, they went to John and asked a question. The first group to go are the oikoloi, they are called, the crowds. Whereas in Matthew's account, he says the scribes and Pharisees went to ask John a question. In Luke's account, the crowds, men and women, Jew, Gentile, everybody's going down to ask John the question, what should we do? And notice what John says. He doesn't tell them to get rid of that nice garment you're wearing and put on a camel hair shirt. You'll really like the feel of camel hair running against your skin, and start eating locusts and wild honey. No, John says, stay where you are. Whatever you are, you remain that. But here's what you do. If you've got extra clothing, give to somebody who has none. If you've got extra food, give to the person who has none. Pure and simple. Share what you have. End of story. And off they go. The second group are called here tax collectors. Actually, the Greek telenoi translates literally toll collector. If you've ever ridden on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you've passed toll booths for sure. Well, believe it or not, these well-constructed highways that the Romans had built throughout the world, but especially in the region of Palestine, had toll booths attached to collect tolls. Now, what's interesting is how you got a job as a toll collector. First of all, the architelenoi, the chief toll collector or tax collector, had to bid on these toll booths from a Roman official, usually the procurator. He had to put a bunch of money up front in order to get his bid in. And if he got his bid, if he won the bid with this money, then he would hire, as you might imagine, his family member, his friends, to be the toll collectors. Now, the problem was, since he paid so much money up front to get this position, he wanted to recoup his investment as quick as possible. And so at the beginning of his tenure, tolls were awfully steep. But eventually, in time, once he recouped his investment, they would moderate, unless he didn't like you, and then he'd stick it to you anyway. The toll collector. They come to John the Baptist and they say, what should we do? And notice what John says. Charge no more than what's prescribed by the law. Now, we have no clue what the law said about that, or if the law said anything about that. But bottom line, John is saying to them, don't rip people off. Pure and simple. And then finally, and a curious group comes up to John the Baptist. Soldiers, we're told. Now, these are not Roman soldiers. These happen to be the soldiers under the employ of King Herod, who was a puppet for the Roman Empire. But they were soldiers. Some of them were actually mercenaries. And they come up to John the Baptist and say, what should we do? John tells them, don't shake people down. Don't extort people, in other words. Don't bully people, he says. And, wonder how this would go over today, be content with your wages. Oh my, I could see a big strike occurring right there in downtown Jordan, couldn't you? Bottom line, treat people with respect. Off they go, and the presumption is to do what John the Baptist asked them to do. The reason I love this passage, and unfortunately it only comes up every 3 years in our reading cycle, is I wonder what we would do. If you heard that John the Baptist was preaching salvation down at the city square, down where City Hall is located, would you dare go down there to ask him, what should we do? What should I do with my life? I suggest probably not. Because here's what we would do. We'd go to a psychic, or we go to a palm reader here down the hill on Route 60 and see what they tell us we should do. Or we'd find the latest version of Dr. Phil or Oprah on the television and we would get that. Or we'd get some of the reruns of Dr. Phil. Or maybe we would Google self-help books and order some from Amazon.com and see what those authors have to say, as conflicting as their reports would be. That's probably what we would do. But then maybe some of us who are really serious about our salvation, about our souls, might dare go down to John the Baptist But the question is, would we be prepared to hear what he would have to say? I can tell you as a Catholic priest, most often people are not. And here's what you get when people ask questions about what they should do. Well, that's your opinion. Or they might come home and tell a spouse or a family member what a kook he is. He's so out of touch with reality. Who, Lord knows that he would do something like that or say something like that. We figure a priest would say that for sure. Would we humble ourselves, in other words, to listen to what John had to say? Because John's speaking to us, whether we go to ask him or not, believe it or not. Every time you come into this church, John's speaking to you. And how do you know that? Well, if you've ever had that feeling of spiritual acid indigestion in your heart, that's usually John speaking to you, calling you to change, to conversion. And what causes that spiritual acid indigestion at the heart? We don't want to listen. Why? Because we know it all. We know it all. We know best. As so many people have told me for the years, I know what I need best. I don't need some priest or the church to tell me what to do. The scriptures, great stories to read every now and then, but I don't need them to guide my life. Or in other words, we lack humility. And so we still are unhappy, we still are miserable, and we fail to seek out the truth, the light, the one that can help us change. But when are we going to change? When are we going to start to listen and to really go out and ask the question of John, what should I do? I'd like to share a story with you about someone who took the risk to ask. Her name is Dorothy Day, and it happened during the time in her life when she was both an atheist and an activist. She lived with her common-law husband, a man named Forster, on Staten Island. At the time all this began, she's pregnant. She had been pregnant before by another man and had an abortion. This time, however, she was in love with Forster, and she very much wanted that baby. But turning the advent of her pregnancy, she began to examine her life and the life she wanted for her child. Suddenly, almost out of nowhere, she began to pray. She began to read the 15th century classic entitled The Imitation of Christ, written by St. Thomas Aquinas. She gradually came to decide that she must baptize her baby, and not only baptize her baby, but baptize her baby Catholic. A sister who ran a home for unwed mothers nearby proved to be her John the Baptist. She asked curtly when approached by Dorothy Day, "How can you have your baby baptized Catholic and not be one yourself?" That is, Dorothy, how can you not change? Dorothy Day thought and prayed, and then came the nagging at the heart. She realized she was at a crossroad. What should she do? Well, she decided to become a Catholic. At the time, of course, she had no notion where that would take her. But meanwhile, it cost her, and it cost her dearly. Her friends abandoned her, but most of all, it cost her her live-in husband, Forster. Listen to her poignant words from her autobiography entitled The Long Loneliness. She writes, "It was killing me to think of leaving him. Getting into bed, cold with the chill of the November air, he held me close to him in silence. I loved him in every way. As a wife, as a mother, I even loved him for all he knew and pitied him for all he didn't know. I loved him for all the odds and ends I had to fish out of his sweater pockets and for the sand and seashells he brought in with his fishing. I loved his lean, cold body as he got into bed smelling of the sea, and I loved his integrity and even his stubborn pride." Now there's a woman in love. But what should she do? Forster was an anarchist with absolutely no interest in organized religion or organized anything else for that matter. And Dorothy? she had encountered Jesus Christ in the Catholic Church, and she had to make a decision. She did. They parted. The cost was high, but she became an authentic, beautiful, and spiritual person. And by the way, the name Dorothy Day you're going to hear a lot of, because her name is currently being proposed for canonization in the Catholic Church. She had had an abortion, for goodness sake, and she's now up for sainthood. Why? Because of her incredible love and hard work for the poor and the holiness of her life. She did a total turnaround in Jesus Christ. But the question still remains, what about you? Do you dare go to John the Baptist and ask, what should I do with my life? Are you prepared for what he might tell you? You might be humiliated. You might be humbled by the experience. You might be embarrassed by the experience. But if that's the only way you can experience light and life, would you dare make that bold move? You know, there's a lot of people in this country today, and probably a lot of you, who are asking, what should I do in light of what happened in Connecticut this past Thursday? It was horrible. It was horrible. One of the worst nightmares we'll ever go through as Americans, at this point in our history anyway. And there are a lot of people asking, what should we do? What should we do? And you know, there's already people saying, well, let's ban handguns. Let's ban guns altogether. Let's get guns totally out of the hands of everybody. That'll take care of it all. And my advice to you is don't buy that. I never saw a gun that killed anyone. No. It was the heart of the person behind the finger on the trigger that caused people to get killed. And so you ban handguns. How long will it be before we find other ways of killing people? People already use knives. This year in our country we have 2 episodes of people who used their car to mow down people to kill them. So do we get rid of cars now? Get rid of them? They're deadly weapons too. How about bow and arrows? We'll get rid of them. My brothers and sisters, the heart is the issue. That is the issue. And until we deal with the human heart, then we're going to continue to have violence in our world and in our society. What happened? What happened? I encourage you to Google the name Dr. Roy Baumeister, B-A-U-M-E-I-S-T-E-R. He's the professor of social psychology at Florida State University. I've been following him for years, especially when he was professor of social psychology at Case Western Reserve. And here's what Professor Baumeister has had to say, something you've heard me say many times. Our egos are too big. We bought into the self-esteem movement. We pumped people up, several generations of children, with this overinflated ego that explodes when it's threatened in any way. And how do you threaten an overinflated ego? Issue an insult. Get in front of them on the highway. Cut them off in traffic. That's how you see them explode. And you know what? You've seen it happen many times. You've seen it happen. He studied the Columbine shooters, the Jonesboro, Arkansas shooters, and he came to the same conclusion. They all possessed high levels of self-esteem. That wasn't the issue. The problem was their egos were entirely too big. My brothers and sisters, we need to listen. We are entirely too arrogant, too haughty, too self-consumed. We've lost the virtue of humility, and we lost it long ago. It's not going to be until we get that back and we start living as people of peace that all of this stuff that's going on in our society is going to stop. We are so angry in this country. So many people carry so much anger in their hearts. And you know what? Carrying a heart full of anger is more difficult than carrying a load of bricks on your back. It's difficult. It hurts. It's painful. When are you going to let it go? When are you going to allow God to come in and stop focusing on self and what I can do to make my life happen? These people come and they ask John the Baptist, what should we do? If John said to you, get rid of your anger and humble yourself, what would you say? What would you say to him? Thank you, John, for your advice. Or what would you say? How dare he accuse me of being arrogant? My brothers and sisters, we got to wake up. We got to wake up as a country. It's already too late. Let us pray for the grace to humble ourselves, as Jesus and John both call us to do. And may we realize it's only through the way of humility that we're going to experience peace in our country.